these right poets like um ma'am ye wala na अच्छा ठीक है यहाँ से these right poets like best painters create in order to teach and delight and when they imitate they don't borrow um from
Read
sorry
from screen, read from screen. And to imitate,
uh
borrow nothing of what is, has been, or shall be, but range, only range with learned discretion into the divine consideration of what may be and should be.
huh, they are not limited to what is there or what has been in the world as the historian or philosophers might be, but rather they enter into divine consideration or of what may be or should be मतलब वो अपने तरीके से उसको represent करते हैं and the right poets deserve the title of weights and teach their readers to be virtuous and they most properly do imitate to teach and delight.
How about this portion? Only reigned with learned discretion into the divine consideration of what may be and should be. What does this mean? Anybody else? Cyber? So in the third category, he adds that in their imitation, when they are copying something that naturally exists, they borrow nothing of what is. They don't borrow things in their condition as they exist. They don't borrow conditions from their history, how it has been. They don't borrow their conditions of how their future, of how their probable future be. But where do they situate the copying, the imitation, but range only reigned with learned discretion. The only thing that reigns means that holds them. The only thing that dictates certain rules. The dictation only comes from learned discretion. Discretion that they have learned means they have the knowledge. Discretion means of one's own whims and desires. They have learned how and where to exercise their desires, exercise their uh, capacity of the wit, their knowledge of making use of their wit, the knowledge of making use of their desires, making use of their creative possibilities. Discretion can be taken to mean their creative possibilities, which they have learned over the course of time. It can be a painter, it can be a poet. They have learned over a long period of time, they have learned the possibilities of imagination, possibilities of creation. That is the only thing that reigns over them. That's the only thing that overpowers their creativity. And then this is converted into divine consideration. And then divine consideration also has a whole. Divine consideration is the final breath that is that any piece of art has in its final in its as a final object. The divine consideration. Give me a while. So the divine consideration is the inspiration that poets seek, and the final breath that that is the soul of the creativity. So apart from the discretion, there is also the inspiration of any piece of art, of what may be and should be. So both of these, discretion and divine consideration, both look at what may be the possibilities and what should be, how to achieve perfection. Perfection and something that is the possibility of a thing, which is the opposite of how things have been, what is, its present, past, and future. Apart from that, this looks into the possibilities, what may be, and what should be, and how perfection can be achieved. An example here I can take is of utopia. Utopia does not talk about what is, has been, or shall be, but of what may be, the possibilities of a true Christian. How how good can a true Christian be? How things should be. The perfection, a state of perfection would be the utopia. So this is how a poet imitates. This is the kind of imitation the poets do, not um, copying from their real conditions, but from their possibilities, greater possibilities. These be they that as the first and most noble sort may justly be termed waits. Now this is who they call waits. Waits are the perfect, the seers, because they see the perfect state which can be achieved. So these are waited on in the excellent text languages and best understandings with the four described name of poets. These are the ones. So these are waited on. These are waited on. People wait for such poets, such good poets whose names remain for ages to come. You remember these names for ages to come. For example, Thomas More. Thomas More has lived some 500 to 600 years before us, but these names remain. You tend to call them poets for ages to come because they write in the excellent, best languages and best understanding, because they have a different kind of understanding where all this has worked. Everything that has been said of the third category, everything. Then for these indeed do merely make to imitate, and imitate both to delight and teach, and delight to move men to that goodness, to take that goodness in hand, which without delight they would fly as from a stranger. So if they do the same thing as is only talk about goodness, give moral lessons, but like a priest, then what would people do? People will only fly away from it. So it ought to be in a manner that's not just teaching you things, but is also delightful. So you create stories around them. So Thomas More was a priest. Thomas More writes Utopia. Utopia is all that Bible has to say to you, but he creates a story. The main character is Christian. His name is Christian. Christian is personified, a true Christian. A true Christian is supposed to be like this, and he teaches via storytelling. Storytelling is the means of his speech of a priest, but not like a priest. He speaks like a poet. That's why readers do not fly from him, but readers read him to this day and teach to make them know the goodness whereunto they are moved. They will be moved towards that kind of goodness, which is not possible by other means. If they dictate come from moral philosophers or priests, people are not moved by it. Which being the noblest scope to whichever any learning was directed, yet want their not idle tongues to bark at them. Now, what does this mean? What do these last lines mean? These are important. In all the paragraphs you saw, last lines are like punchlines to the passage. Quickly, कुछ समझ आ रहा है लास्ट वाले पार्ट में? This means which being the noblest scope to which ever any learning was directed. This is the noblest scope of all learning. The purpose of all learning was basically this, which was to impart teaching, impart good learning. But only poets could achieve it because they do it in a delightful manner while also entertaining through stories. Yet want there not idle tongues to bark at them. This was the noblest scope of any learning, but the scope of any learning was not this, that idle tongues will bark at them. Idle tongues refers to
Puritans.
Puritans. Stephen goes on. Barking at poetry and poets. I read again. And teach to make them know that goodness whereunto they are moved, which being the noblest scope to which ever any learning was directed, yet want there not idle tongues to bark at them. These be subdivided into sundry more special denominations, the most notable be the heroic, lyric, tragic, comic, satiric, iambic, elegiac, pastoral, and certain others, some of these being termed according to the matter they deal with, some by the sort of verse they liked best to write in. For indeed, the greatest part of poets have apparelled their poetical inventions in that numberous kind of writing which is called verse. Numberous means in the numeric form in this English, Middle English. Indeed, but apparelled means clothed. Indeed, but apparelled, verse being but an ornament and no cause to poetry. Poetry is not caused because it's written in rhythmic form, but rhyme is just an ornament, an additional beauty you can add to poetry. Poetry has much more to do without the beauty of its rhyme. It's just an additional beauty that you give to it, an ornament. Number, verse, rhythm is only an additional ornament of poetry, not a cause of poetry. Since there have been many most excellent poets that never versified, and now swarm many versifiers that need never answer to the name of poets. Now he additionally gives the examples of people who did versify but were not poets, and poets who never versified. For Xenophon, who did imitate so excellently as to give us Effigium Justi Imperi, the portraiture of a just empire, under the name of Cyrus, as Cicero says of him, made therein an absolute heroical poem, so did Heliodorus in his sugared invention of that picture of love in Theagenes and Charite. And yet, both these wrote in prose. Now, the names he gives you, Heliodorus and Xenophon, they are poets but did not write in rhyme. He's exemplifying what he said in this part, that there have been poets who did not versify and there have been other philosophers who did versify but were not poets. First example he gives you of poets who did not versify, followed by, which I speak to show that it's not rhyming and versing that makes a poet. This is not the current spelling we follow of rhyming. This is the spelling followed then. We spell it as R-H-Y-M-E. That is not rhyming and versing that makes a poet, no more than a long gown makes an advocate, who though he pleaded in armor, should be an advocate and no soldier. So here he means clothing of the same person. If you call a poet because he rhymes, it also means that person who wears a long gown will be called an advocate. Or if he then pleads in armor, means he's working in a coat but wearing an armor, he won't be a soldier then. But it's that feigning notable images of virtues, vices, or what else, with that delightful teaching. Again, this is Aristotelian thought, delight and teach. Poetry is something that serves both the purpose of being delightful and teaching. So these feigning of images of a poet is, and through teaching, imparting knowledge in a delightful manner is what makes a poet, which must be the right describing note to know a poet by. These are the describing features, characteristics. describing characteristics by which you can know a poet. One, he feigns, imitates notable images of virtue, vices. So he writes stories around these uh, moral principles, and he does that in a delightful teaching. That's what a poet is, as per Aristotle. So we also believe that Philip Sidney follows Aristotle and not Plato. Although indeed the Senate of poets has chosen verse as if it is raiment. Raiment is again garment, meaning as in matter they passed all in all, so in manner to go beyond them, not speaking. Table talk fashion, or like men in a dream. Words as they chancellingly fall from the mouth, but pleasing in vain. Each syllable of each word by just proportion according to the dignity of the subject. Although indeed the Senate of poets has chosen verse as their fittest raiment, again he says, of course, many poets have chosen rhyming as their fittest means of expression, but that's not all, that's not everything. There have been poets who went beyond that. Then he tells you of table talk fashion. Table talk fashion. He gives you examples. He gives you examples of in manner to go beyond them. People who did go beyond that raiment and surpassed the rules. Surpassed the rules, like you are talking about fashion. You're talking about fashion, table talk fashion. These days, this feature is something new. This feature began in England in around during and after Elizabethan times, in the last years of Elizabeth. Table talk fashion, that people started talking about fashion, and this was discussed on tables. It became a debate, a topic on which people did start debating. Culture became a point of discussion because of cultural imperialism. There was invasion of other cultures. They had started using bone china from China. So table talk fashion was talking about the cultures in fashion. Or like men in a dream, words as they chancellingly fall from the mouth, but pacing each syllable of each word by just proportion. So there are these examples that are also that also became the topics of discussion for poets, and not chancellingly as they chancellingly fall from the mouth. They were simply the way they come out of your mouth. If you're talking about it, discussion as they chancellingly fall from your mouth, not necessarily in a rhythmic form. If you and I are talking about something at this point, the discussion is in prosaic form as you speak, and you start writing it in the same manner as if you were talking. This is called colloquial language use. This colloquial language use also became poetry later on, but pacing each syllable of each word by just proportion according to the dignity of the subject. So there was weighing of words, of course. There was weighing of syllables, of course, in whatever they wrote, but not necessarily versification, which means poets chose their words, poets chose their words of expression very carefully, but they did not tend to rhyme the verses. The sentences need not be poetic. They need not be in verses. They were sentences, but the words they used were weighed before they were written. The syllables were weighed before they were written. For example, you see here the fittest raiment. He does this on purpose. So even when he is talking about prose, even if he is writing himself in prose, but he is making a different use of language. He is making use of specific words that he wants when he wants to talk about something. Like here, an advocate pleading in armor. These are weighed words. He is weighing them before speaking them, before writing them down. Okay, each word is proportionally chosen and written. It depends upon the dignity of the subject, what subject you are talking about. Or previously, he accuses here. He accuses Puritans, idle tongues to bark at them. This is also called weighing of the words and syllables. Okay. Moving on, is this clear?
Yes, ma'am.
All of it?
Yes, ma'am.
Now somebody read. but read it in a manner that it makes sense. Sahiba, can you read?
Yes, ma'am. Now, therefore, it shall not be amiss first to weigh this latter sort of poetry by his works, and then by his parts. And if in neither of these anatomies he be condemnable, I hope we shall obtain a more favorable sentence. This purifying of wit, this enriching of memory, enabling of judgment, and enlarging of conceit, which commonly we call learning, under what name soever it come forth, or to what immediate end soever it be directed. The final end is to lead and draw us to as high a perfection as our degenerate souls, made worse by their clay lodgings, can be capable of.
That's
This,
it.
according to the
Bus. Can
Hmm.
anybody tell me what does this mean? Just this, just these two sentences. These are just two sentences. Why does this require reading twice? I have been trying to help you that you understand Sydney like you understand any novel that you read from 19th century. But still it takes you two or three readings to understand it. Now therefore it shall not be amiss first to weigh this latter sort of poetry by his works, and then by his parts. And if in neither of these anatomies he be condemnable, I hope we shall obtain a more favorable sentence. Now he says of the poets he has been talking about in the last paragraph, in the last part, he says, I'll pick up some examples. I'll pick examples of complete works, I'll pick examples of parts of their works, and then if neither of these anatomies means he is looking into sections of everything, going into the detail to find if there is something that can help redeeming the position of poetry. And if in neither of these anatomies he be condemnable, I hope we shall obtain a more favorable sentence. And if we find that there are no anomalies, anomalies, if there are no mistakes there, if there are no anomalies, if he is not condemnable in them, then we will of course have a certain favorable sentences for these poets. This purifying of wit, what I'm trying to do is purifying wit, because he makes use of wit. I am trying to give him that space. This purifying of wit, this enriching of memory, enabling of judgment, and enlarging of conceit. These are all characteristics of such poets. I read again. The four sequences, four series given to you. This purifying of wit, this enriching of memory, enabling of judgment, and enlarging of conceit, which commonly we call learning, under what name soever it come forth. So today we would use under whatsoever name it come forth. But he breaks whatsoever into what name soever. He does that again in the same sentence. Under what name soever it come forth, or to what immediate end soever it be directed, means whatsoever the immediate end it be directed. Or to what immediate